Naomi Carter gripped the steering wheel as the familiar rumble of her aging sedan sputtered into silence. Her heart raced as the car came to a jerking halt on a narrow bridge under the dim light of the setting sun. Behind her, a line of vehicles began to form, their horns blaring impatiently. The bridge, a single-lane relic of Shreveport's past, hovered precariously over the sluggish waters of the Red River. Naomi, 7 months pregnant, cursed her decision to take the old car instead of borrowing her husband's more reliable vehicle. Her phone's battery had died hours ago, and there wasn't a soul in sight willing to help, a reality she was starting to suspect had more to do with her being black than the situation at hand. A pickup truck approached from the opposite side of the bridge, its bright headlights momentarily blinding her. The truck skidded to a stop a few feet away, and a white man in his late 40s stepped out. His expression was unreadable as he sized her up. Naomi felt the weight of his gaze settle uncomfortably on her swollen belly before returning to her face. "Car trouble?" he asked, his southern drawl thick and unhurried. Naomi hesitated. "Yes, it just died. I need to call for a tow, but my phone—" "Figures," he interrupted, shaking his head. "You know you shouldn't be driving a junker like this, especially in your condition." His tone wasn't exactly kind. Naomi forced a polite smile. "I just need to get home. Can I borrow your phone?" Instead of responding, the man turned toward his truck and retrieved a phone. He tapped the screen a few times before handing it to her, but as Naomi reached for it, he pulled back slightly. "Before you call anyone, you should know," he said, narrowing his eyes. "This is a bad spot to break down. Dangerous folk around here." The warning sounded more like a threat. Naomi's unease deepened as the man leaned against her car, watching her dial. Before she could press the call button, another truck appeared behind her, its headlights washing over the scene. 2 younger men jumped out, both wearing baseball caps and smirks that made her skin crawl. "What's going on here, Ray?" one of them asked, nodding toward Naomi. "Lady's car broke down," Ray replied casually. "Thought I'd lend a hand." The 2 men exchanged looks, and one let out a low whistle. "Pretty bold to be driving out here alone," he remarked, eyes lingering on her belly. "And at night." Naomi felt the air grow thicker with tension. She clutched the phone tighter and tried to suppress her trembling hands. "Thank you for stopping," she said, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her chest. "I'll just call a tow truck now." Ray snorted. "Good luck with that. Closest service is 40 miles out. Won't be here for hours." The younger man chuckled. "Maybe we should help her out instead." "Thanks, but I'm fine," Naomi insisted, trying to mask her growing alarm. Ray's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Now, ma'am, we can't just leave you here like this. That wouldn't be neighborly, would it?" The third man moved closer, his hand grazing the car door. Naomi's instinct screamed at her to run, but where? She was stranded in the middle of a bridge with no escape. Her stomach tightened painfully, not from her pregnancy, but from the realization that she was utterly at their mercy. Then, as if summoned by divine intervention, headlights cut through the darkness from the direction she had come. A police cruiser rolled onto the bridge, its lights flashing. Relief washed over Naomi, but it was short-lived. The officer stepped out, adjusting his belt as he surveyed the scene. "Evening, folks," the officer drawled. His gaze fell on Naomi, and the flicker of recognition in his eyes was unnerving. "Car trouble?" "Yes," Naomi exclaimed, her voice trembling with relief. "It just stopped and I need—" "Hold on there," he interrupted, raising a hand. He turned to Ray. "Everything all right here?" Ray shrugged, his casual demeanor intact. "Just helping the lady out, officer. She's in a bad spot." The officer nodded, but his next words chilled Naomi. "She's lucky you're here. Not the best place for outsiders." The emphasis on the last word wasn't lost on Naomi. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the useless phone. "Maybe we should call for backup," the officer suggested. "Make sure everything stays civil." Ray grinned. "Good idea." Naomi's heart sank as the men exchanged knowing looks. The sense of relief she had felt moments ago turned into dread. Backup wasn't coming to help her, it was coming to ensure her compliance. "I'll tow her car myself," Ray offered, patting the hood. She can ride with me. No, thank you. Naomi blurted, panic breaking through her polite facade. I'll wait for the tow truck. The officer stepped closer, his presence looming. Ma'am, you should take the help when it's offered. You don't want to cause any trouble. Trouble? The word hung in the air like a threat. Naomi looked at the three men, then at the officer, realizing the precariousness of her situation. Her mind raced for a way out as another contraction gripped her abdomen, sharp and insistent. Before she could respond, a woman's voice called out from the far end of the bridge. What's going on here? A young couple had appeared, both black, their expressions wary but determined. They had been driving by when they saw the commotion. The sight of them brought Naomi a flicker of hope. Is everything okay, ma'am? The man asked, his voice steady. The officer turned, his expression hardening. Just handling a situation. Best you keep moving. The couple didn't budge. We'll stay until she's sorted, the woman said firmly. Ray's smile faltered, and the atmosphere shifted. The arrival of witnesses disrupted the men's unspoken power. Naomi exhaled shakily, clutching her stomach as another contraction rippled through her. The young man pulled out his phone and dialed 911. We'll get another officer out here, he announced. Just to be safe. The tension was palpable as Ray and his friends stepped back. The officer's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Moments later, Naomi heard the faint wail of approaching sirens. This time, real help was on the way. The ordeal had shaken her to her core, but as the paramedics arrived and loaded her onto a stretcher, Naomi felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the couple who had stopped. They had saved her, not just from the car trouble, but from the dark intentions that had surrounded her on that bridge. The wail of approaching sirens faded into the distance as Naomi lay in the back of the ambulance. Just as she thought she could finally exhale, the ambulance slowed abruptly, forcing her to clutch the sides of the stretcher. She glanced out the rear window and saw the flashing red lights of police vehicles disappear into the distance. Something wasn't right. The vehicle came to a complete stop, and Naomi could hear raised voices outside. Then, a deep rumble, the unmistakable sound of motorcycle engines, rolled through the night air like a low growl. Naomi's pulse quickened. Through the small side window, she saw a group of bikers surrounding the ambulance. They wore black leather jackets emblazoned with the word Steel Angels, a name she recognized from news reports about violent biker gangs. The back doors of the ambulance swung open. Standing there was a tall, rugged man with sharp blue eyes that glinted in the light of the ambulance. He looked like he had seen a lifetime of hard roads and harder fights. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his voice dripping with mock politeness. "Name's Luke Hayes. Mind if we have a little chat?" Naomi clutched her belly protectively, the baby inside her kicking in response to her rising anxiety. "Please," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just want to go home." Luke smirked, leaning one arm casually on the doorframe. "Home? Huh? Funny thing about bridges like this, lots of folks don't make it off them. Especially folks like you, all alone in the wrong place at the wrong time." Behind him, his crew laughed. There were at least a dozen of them, their faces obscured by helmets or grins that were anything but friendly. Naomi recognized Ray, the man who had initially offered his help when her car broke down. He stood a little behind Luke, his arms crossed and a smirk on his face. The two younger men from earlier were there too, now emboldened as part of the gang. The EMTs in the ambulance exchanged nervous glances. One of them, a young white woman, tried to reason with Luke. "We're medical professionals. Let us pass. This woman needs urgent care." Luke's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, dangerous expression. "Did I ask for your opinion, sweetheart?" he snapped, making the EMT flinch. He turned his gaze back to Naomi, his smirk returning. "Now, you're coming with us. Or do we have to make things messy?" Naomi's heart pounded so loudly she thought it might burst. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. "I haven't done anything to you." Luke's expression darkened. "Haven't done anything?" he said, his voice rising. "You people think you can go wherever you want, do whatever you want, and no one's supposed to say anything? This here's our territory, and you're trespassing." Naomi's voice cracked as she pleaded, I'm just trying to get home to my family. One of the younger bikers, a wiry man with a patchy beard, leaned into the ambulance. Family, huh? Probably got a bunch of kids already. Bet we're paying for all of 'em too. The group erupted in laughter, their jeers slicing through Naomi's fragile composure. Every cruel word felt like a blow, but she knew she couldn't afford to let them see her break. Suddenly, the deep rumble of another engine echoed through the night. A sleek, black motorcycle pulled up behind the gang, its single rider clad in a dark helmet. For a moment, the bikers fell silent, their laughter dying as they turned to see who had arrived. The rider dismounted and removed the helmet, revealing the face of the black man from earlier, the one who had stopped on the bridge with his wife to help Naomi. "I think you've had your fun," he said, his voice calm but laced with steel. His wife stood beside him, holding a phone to her ear, clearly still connected to 911. Luke sneered. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" "Just someone who doesn't like seeing a pregnant woman harassed by cowards," the man replied evenly. He stepped closer, his hands relaxed at his sides but ready. Naomi could barely breathe. Her saviors were outnumbered, but the man's presence sent a ripple of tension through the steel angels. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances. Their bravado wavered but didn't break. Luke stepped forward, towering over the man. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But this ain't your fight, and you're not gonna like how it ends if you stick around." The man didn't flinch. "You're right, it's not my fight. It's our fight." He gestured toward Naomi and the EMTs. "And it's over. Police are already on their way." As if on cue, distant sirens grew louder. The gang hesitated, their unity faltering under the weight of impending consequences. Luke cursed under his breath, shooting a venomous glare at Naomi. "This ain't over," he growled. "You'll wish it was." He motioned for his crew to retreat. One by one, the bikers mounted their motorcycles and roared away into the night. Only Ray lingered, his face twisted with a mix of anger and humiliation. He spat on the ground before climbing onto his bike and disappearing into the darkness. As the police arrived and the paramedics resumed their duties, Naomi broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. The couple who had stood by her side helped her back onto the stretcher, their kind words washing over her like a balm. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to hope that she and her baby would make it home safely. But as the ambulance pulled away, Naomi couldn't shake Luke's parting words. This wasn't over, and she knew he meant it. The ambulance had barely disappeared into the distance when the roar of motorcycles echoed once more across the bridge. Naomi froze as the steel angels returned, their headlights slicing through the dark like predatory eyes. Luke Hayes led the pack, his leather jacket glinting under the moonlight, and the air crackled with the menace of their arrival. As they approached, Naomi instinctively pressed her back against the cold metal of her broken-down car, clutching her swollen belly. Her mind raced with dread. What now? The couple who had helped earlier were gone, along with the EMTs and police. She was utterly alone again. Luke dismounted his bike with practiced ease, his boots clinking against the concrete bridge. The same smirk from earlier stretched across his face as he tilted his head toward Naomi. "Now, ma'am, I thought we got off on the wrong foot earlier. Let's start fresh," he said, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. "Looks like you're still stuck here." Naomi's throat tightened, but she forced herself to respond. "I just need to wait for a tow truck," she said cautiously, her voice betraying her fear. Luke chuckled, and his crew followed suit. "Tow truck? Out here? You'll be waiting all night. But lucky for you, we're a helpful bunch." She didn't trust him, not for a second. But what choice did she have? The odds were stacked against her, and every second that passed felt heavier than the last. Luke motioned to two of his men. "Billy, Tank, pop the hood and see what we're dealing with." The two bikers exchanged a look but obeyed. Tank, a towering man with a shaved head and an assortment of tattoos that snaked down his neck, yanked the hood open. Billy, smaller and wiry with a cigarette dangling from his lips, leaned in to inspect the engine. Naomi watched them warily, her arms folded tightly across her chest. She could hear Tank muttering as he poked around the car's inner workings. After a few minutes, He straightened and wiped his hands on a greasy rag. "Battery's dead," he declared, his voice gruff. Luke clapped his hands together. "Well, that's an easy fix, ain't it? Let's jump it." Before Naomi could react, Billy grabbed a set of jumper cables from his motorcycle saddlebag and began hooking them up. Naomi bit her lip, torn between cautious gratitude and an overwhelming sense of dread. "Relax," Luke said, as if sensing her unease. "We're not all bad. Just trying to get you back on the road." The words felt hollow, like a trap set with a charming smile. Naomi nodded silently, her hands trembling as she held them protectively over her belly. As the bikers worked on the engine, Luke leaned against the car and studied her with unnerving intensity. "So, what's a lady like you doing out here all alone?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes predatory. "I was coming back from a family reunion," Naomi replied, keeping her answers short. Luke let out a low whistle. "Family reunion? Huh? Bet they're all wondering where you are right about now." She avoided his gaze, focusing instead on the steady hum of the biker's work. "My husband knows I'm on my way," she lied. The truth was her phone had been dead for hours, and no one had any idea where she was. Luke's smile turned sharp. "Your husband? Huh? And he let you drive this death trap in your condition?" He gestured toward her belly. "Real stand-up guy." The comment stung more than she cared to admit. Naomi opened her mouth to respond but was cut off by Billy's triumphant shout. "Got it," he declared, stepping back as the car's engine roared to life. Relief flooded Naomi, but it was short-lived. Luke stepped closer, his smirk widening. "See? Told you we're not all bad. Now, how about a little thank you?" Naomi hesitated, unsure what he meant. "Thank you," she said softly, but Luke shook his head. "Oh, that's not enough," he said, his voice taking on a darker edge. "We just saved you a whole lot of trouble. Least you could do is show a little appreciation." The implication in his words made her stomach churn. "I don't have any cash on me," she said quickly, trying to deflect. Luke's grin faltered, replaced by a scowl. "You think we're talking about money?" Naomi's chest tightened as the bikers around her closed in slightly, their presence suffocating. Luke's gaze lingered on her, and she could feel the weight of his intentions pressing down on her like a vice. "She's got nothing to give, Luke," Tank muttered, but Luke silenced him with a glare. "Nothing?" Luke repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "She's got plenty. Look at her. She thinks she's better than us. Driving through our territory like she owns the place." The other bikers nodded, their expressions hardening. Naomi's heart pounded as she realized the precariousness of her situation. The air was thick with tension, and every instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I just want to go home." Luke's expression softened, but it was a facade. "Home? Sure, we'll let you go home," he said. "But remember this, you're on our bridge, in our world. Next time, you might not get off so easy." Naomi nodded frantically, tears spilling down her cheeks. The bikers lingered for a moment longer, their eyes filled with unspoken threats, before Luke motioned for them to back off. One by one, they mounted their bikes, the roar of their engines filling the night once more. "Safe travels, ma'am," Luke said, his smirk returning as he climbed onto his motorcycle. "And don't forget, you owe us." With that, the Steel Angels sped off into the darkness, leaving Naomi shaking and alone on the bridge. Her car was running, but the terror they had left behind lingered. She climbed into the driver's seat and gripped the wheel tightly, forcing herself to focus. She had to get off this bridge, out of their territory, and back to safety. But as she drove away, one thought haunted her. Luke's words weren't a warning. They were a promise. This wasn't over. The night deepened, and the cold, damp air of the Red River clung to Naomi's skin as she stood by her car, watching the bikers tinker with the engine. Despite their threatening demeanor earlier, they appeared focused now, seemingly intent on getting her car started. Luke Hayes, the leader of the Steel Angels, loitered near her with a predatory smirk that made her skin crawl. His relaxed posture belied the simmering danger he carried, a subtle reminder that his help came with strings attached. The growl of an approaching engine interrupted the moment. A rusty, mud-streaked pickup truck rolled onto the bridge, its headlights cutting through the haze. The driver, an older white man with a face weathered by years of hard labor, pulled to a stop a few feet away. He killed the engine and stepped out, slamming the door with enough force to rattle the truck's frame. "What in the hell is this?" the man demanded, his voice carrying across the bridge. He marched toward the bikers, his boots stomping against the concrete. "You vultures scamming folks again? What did y'all promise this lady? Some miracle fix for a price she can't afford?" Luke turned to face the man, his expression calm but his eyes glittering with malice. "We're just helping," he said smoothly, spreading his hands as if to display his innocence. "Her car broke down, and we're getting her back on the road. You got a problem with that?" The man, undeterred, jabbed a finger toward Luke. "Yeah, I got a problem. Every time y'all show up, somebody ends up worse off than before. What's your game this time? A busted alternator? Some story about needing a new fuel pump?" Naomi's stomach twisted. The man's accusations only added to her unease. She glanced at the bikers working under her hood, their faces shadowed but intent. Tank, the massive, tattooed one, straightened up and wiped his hands on his jeans, his expression darkening. "Watch your mouth, old man," Tank growled. "We ain't scamming nobody. Could have fooled me." The man shot back, crossing his arms. "Lady, you need to watch these boys. They'll take you for everything you've got if you let 'em." Naomi hesitated, unsure whether to trust this stranger. While the bikers were intimidating, they hadn't asked for money yet. Still, the man's words planted a seed of doubt. Luke chuckled, a low, dangerous sound. "We're just helping, friend," he said, his voice dripping with false geniality. "If you're so worried, why don't you join in? Pop the hood and get your hands dirty." The man's jaw tightened, but he didn't back down. "I've seen your kind before," he said, "pretending to help, but you're just waiting for the right moment to strike. Preying on folks who don't know better." "Preying?" Luke echoed, his tone shifting to mockery. "Now, that's a fancy word. You sure you know what it means?" The bikers snickered, the tension on the bridge thickening with each passing second. Naomi's heart raced as she stood trapped between these two opposing forces, neither of which felt entirely safe. The man turned to Naomi, his voice softening slightly. "Ma'am, do you even know these guys? You don't have to trust 'em just because they're here." "I didn't have much of a choice," Naomi admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced at Luke, who was now watching her with a sharp, calculating gaze. "They stopped to help after my car broke down." The man sighed, shaking his head. "They're not here to help. They're here to take advantage of you." Luke took a step closer, his boots scraping against the concrete. "Now, that's a mighty bold claim," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I don't recall a skin her for a dime." "No," the man shot back, his voice rising. "But you will. That's how this works. You fix her car, then demand payment, or worse." The accusation hung in the air like a loaded gun. Naomi felt her pulse quicken, her instincts screaming at her to flee, though her swollen belly and dead phone left her powerless. She glanced back at her car, wishing for the engine to miraculously roar to life and save her from this nightmare. Luke's calm demeanor finally cracked, his smirk hardening into a sneer. "You got a big mouth, old man," he said, taking another step forward. "Maybe you should worry about your own business before sticking your nose where it don't belong." "I'm making it my business," the man replied, standing his ground. "This bridge don't belong to you, and neither does she." Tank growled low in his throat and took a menacing step toward the man, but Luke raised a hand, halting him. "Easy," Luke said, his voice deceptively calm. He turned his attention back to Naomi. "Ma'am, you tell me, have we done anything but try to help you tonight?" Naomi hesitated, the weight of the question bearing down on her. If she sided with the man in the truck, she risked antagonizing the bikers further. But if she sided with Luke, she might be setting herself up for something far worse. "I just want to go home," she said finally, her voice trembling. Luke nodded slowly, as if her answer satisfied him. "And that's exactly what we're trying to help you do." The man shook his head in frustration. Don't fall for it, he warned her. They're only... Enough. Luke snapped, his voice cutting through the air like a whip. We're done here. You don't like the way we're doing things? Fine. Take over. Fix her car yourself. For a moment, the man seemed taken aback. Then, with a reluctant sigh, he stepped toward the car, glaring at the bikers as he passed. Naomi felt a flicker of hope as the man inspected the engine, muttering to himself about the battery cables. But the tension remained thick, the bikers looming nearby like vultures waiting for their moment. Let's see if this works, the man muttered, connecting the cables properly and signaling Naomi to try the ignition. She slid into the driver's seat, her hands trembling as she turned the key. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. Naomi exhaled a shaky breath of relief, but it was short-lived. Luke's voice cut through the moment like a knife. Guess the old man saved the day, he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. But don't forget who got you this far. Naomi glanced at Luke, his icy gaze locking onto hers. She nodded stiffly, afraid to say anything more. As the man guided her back into the driver's seat and waved her on, Luke leaned closer, his voice a low growl. You remember this, lady? We'll see you again. Her stomach twisted as she drove off, leaving the bridge and its threats behind. But Luke's words haunted her, a chilling reminder that the nightmare might not be over. The engine roared to life, its sputtering replaced by a steady hum that filled the tense silence on the bridge. Naomi let out a shaky breath, gripping the steering wheel as relief washed over her. The bikers stepped back, their silhouettes illuminated by the car's headlights. Luke Hayes stood at the center, arms crossed, his smirk ever present. The older man in the pickup truck hovered nearby, his face a mask of wary disapproval. Naomi hesitated, glancing between Luke and the man who had confronted him. Though her instincts screamed at her to drive away as fast as she could, she forced herself to nod toward Luke. Thank you for your help, she said quietly, her voice strained but polite. Luke's smirk widened, his blue eyes glinting in the darkness. No need to thank me, ma'am, he drawled. We're just good Samaritans, doing our civic duty. The other bikers chuckled at his words, the sound low and mocking. Tank clapped a hand on the hood of Naomi's car, leaving a greasy smudge. Don't mention it, sweetheart, he added with a leer. Naomi swallowed hard, her fingers tightening on the steering wheel. I appreciate it, she said again, keeping her tone measured. Of course you do, Luke replied, his voice thick with condescension. Not every day you find folks willing to lend a hand, is it? Especially out here. Naomi's stomach twisted at the unspoken implication. She forced a weak smile and reached for the gear shift, eager to leave the bridge and the steel angels far behind. But as she leaned toward the seat, her fingers brushed against something foreign. She froze and glanced down. Lying on the passenger seat was a black patch with bold, embroidered letters that read Steel Angels. Beneath the words was a snarling, winged skull, a crude, menacing emblem. Naomi's heart sank. It wasn't there before. She looked up at Luke, who was watching her with a satisfied expression. A little token to remember us by, he said, his tone casual but dripping with menace. You keep that close now. Why here? Never know when you'll need friends like us. Naomi's breath hitched, her mind racing. The patch wasn't a gift, it was a mark. A symbol of ownership. A warning. She didn't dare reject it, not with Luke and his crew still surrounding her car. Instead, she forced a tight-lipped nod and quickly slipped the patch into the glove compartment, her hands trembling. The older man stepped closer, his voice cutting through the tense atmosphere. She don't need your souvenirs, he said sharply, his gaze locked on Luke. She's got what she needs, and she's leaving. Ain't that right, ma'am? Naomi nodded frantically, grateful for the man's intervention. Yes, she said quickly. Thank you again. Luke's smirk didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. He took a deliberate step toward the man, his presence as imposing as a storm cloud. Now, who said you get to speak for her? He asked, his voice low and threatening. We were just having a friendly moment here. The man didn't back down, his stance firm. Friendly? That what you call leaving your mark on people who didn't ask for it? Tank shifted uncomfortably, but Luke held his ground, his smirk finally fading. "You got a real problem, old man," he said, his voice cold. "But lucky for you, I'm in a generous mood tonight." He turned back to Naomi, his expression softening into mock warmth. "Safe travels, ma'am," he said. "And don't forget, you owe us now." Naomi felt a chill run down her spine, his words as binding as a chain. She nodded mutely and started the car, her foot hovering over the accelerator as she waited for the bikers to move. One by one, they climbed onto their motorcycles, their engines roaring to life. Luke was the last to leave, his piercing gaze locked on Naomi until the very moment he sped away, his tailpipe spitting smoke. The older man lingered, watching the bikers disappear into the distance before turning back to Naomi. "You all right?" he asked, his tone gentler now. Naomi nodded, though her hands were still shaking. "Thank you," she whispered, "for standing up to them." The man waved her gratitude away. "Don't thank me," he said gruffly. "Just get out of here. And next time, don't trust anyone out here, not even me." The warning sent another jolt of unease through her, but Naomi didn't question it. She shifted into gear and pressed the gas, the car lurching forward. As she drove off the bridge, the weight of the Steel Angels' presence lingered like a dark shadow, their emblem burning a hole in her mind. By the time Naomi reached the safety of a well-lit gas station miles away, her nerves were frayed. She parked under the fluorescent lights and rested her head against the steering wheel, fighting back tears. The patch sat in her glove compartment like a ticking time bomb, a stark reminder that her ordeal wasn't truly over. She debated what to do. Toss it? Burn it? Keep it as proof in case she needed to report them? None of the options felt right. Instead, she reached for her phone, which she'd managed to charge using the car's power outlet. Her husband's number was the first in her call log, but her finger hovered over it. How could she explain what had happened without falling apart? Naomi set the phone down and stared out the windshield, her reflection fractured by the fluorescent glare. For the moment, she was safe, but the Steel Angels had made one thing clear. This wasn't just about a broken-down car. It was about power, control, and humiliation. And as much as she wanted to put the night behind her, she knew she was marked now, in more ways than one. Naomi was finally home, though the sense of safety she expected didn't arrive with her. Every sound seemed amplified in the quiet of the night. The creak of the old house settling, the hum of the refrigerator, the wind rustling through the trees outside. She sat at the kitchen table, the Steel Angels patch resting on the wood surface like a taunt. She hadn't been able to throw it away. Not yet. The baby kicked, a gentle but insistent reminder that she wasn't just protecting herself anymore. Naomi placed her hand on her stomach, whispering soothing words to her unborn child as if to calm her own frayed nerves. The events of the night replayed in her mind, each moment twisting her stomach into knots. Then came the knock at the door. Naomi froze, her breath hitching in her throat. It was nearly midnight, too late for casual visits. Another knock followed, louder this time, reverberating through the quiet house. She grabbed her phone, her fingers trembling as she hovered over the emergency dial. The third knock came, firm but not aggressive. Against her better judgment, she tiptoed to the window and peeked through the curtain. Her heart dropped. Standing on her porch, illuminated by the yellow glow of the porch light, was Luke Hayes. He wasn't wearing his leather jacket this time, just a plain black t-shirt that stretched across his broad chest. His hands were stuffed casually in his pockets, and his expression was surprisingly neutral, neither threatening nor friendly. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice muffled through the door. "I just want to talk." Naomi's instinct screamed at her to stay silent, but she knew Luke had already seen the light in the window. She tightened her grip on the phone and hesitated before unlocking the door, opening it just a crack. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her effort to sound firm. Luke held up his hands, palms out in a show of surrender. "Relax, I'm not here to cause trouble. Just wanted to make sure you got home safe." Naomi stared at him, incredulous. "You followed me?" He shrugged. "Not exactly. Let's just say I've got a good sense of direction." His smirk returned, though it was less sharp than usual. "I know I might have come off a little strong back on the bridge, but, look, I wanted to make sure you were okay. That's all. Why? The words slipped out before Naomi could stop herself. Why would you care? Luke scratched the back of his neck, suddenly looking less composed. You ever have someone do something for you? Something big that they didn't have to do? He asked. When I was younger, I was in a bad way. Made some real dumb choices. But there was this guy, didn't know me from Adam, who stepped in and gave me a second chance. Didn't judge me, didn't expect nothing in return. Naomi frowned, unsure where this was going. Point is, Luke continued, I made a promise to myself that if I ever saw someone who needed help, I'd pay it forward. Tonight, that someone was you. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. For a moment, the menacing figure she'd encountered on the bridge was replaced by something softer, more human. But the memory of his earlier threats and the patch sitting on her table kept her on edge. Is that supposed to make me feel better? She asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. You scared me half to death tonight. Luke nodded, his expression serious. Yeah, I can see that now. And I'm sorry if we came on too strong. I guess we're not great at the whole subtle thing. He offered a half-smile, as if trying to lighten the mood. Naomi didn't smile back. I just want to move on from this. I get that, Luke said. But before I go, let me say this. People ain't always what they seem. Me and my crew, we've got a reputation. Some of it earned, sure, but it don't mean we're all bad. Naomi's grip on the door tightened. I'll keep that in mind. Luke took a step back, his hand still raised in a non-threatening gesture. All right, I'll leave you to it. Just wanted to say my piece. He paused, glancing at the baby bump now visible beneath her loose t-shirt. Take care of yourself, and that little one. With that, he turned and walked back to his motorcycle parked at the curb. Naomi watched as he rode off into the night, the low rumble of the engine fading into silence. The next morning, Naomi sat at the same kitchen table, staring at the patch. Her emotions were tangled. Fear, relief, confusion. She couldn't shake the feeling that the night had been a twisted lesson in the unpredictability of people. On a whim, she opened her laptop and began typing. She wrote about the bridge, about the Steel Angels, and about Luke's unexpected visit. She didn't shy away from the tension, the humiliation, or the fear she'd felt, but she also included Luke's explanation, his story about paying it forward. The post wasn't meant to excuse the way she'd been treated or erase the fear that still lingered. It was meant to explore the complexity of the encounter. Could someone like Luke be both a threat and a savior? Could his actions, however unsettling, come from a genuine place? By the time she finished, her post was raw, honest, and conflicted, much like her feelings. She hesitated before hitting publish, unsure if she wanted to share something so personal, but in the end, she clicked the button. Within hours, the post began gaining traction. Comments flooded in, some praising her bravery, others criticizing her for painting the Steel Angels in a sympathetic light. But the story resonated with many, sparking debates about judgment, kindness, and the fine line between good and bad. Naomi read the comments with a mix of pride and trepidation. Her experience on the bridge had shaken her to her core, but sharing it had given her a strange sense of control over the narrative. The Steel Angels had left their mark, but now, so had she. As she closed her laptop, a single thought lingered in her mind. Perhaps, in the chaos of that night, she had stumbled upon a truth she hadn't been looking for, that humanity, in all its flawed and frightening forms, was capable of surprising her in ways she never expected.